is the Preparedness Radio Network, preparing you for natural and man-made disasters, helpful tips on gardening and homesteading. Be prepared, and remember, preparedness saves lives. This is the Preparedness Radio Network. On the air, everywhere, it's the Dr. Prepper Show with #1 best-selling preparedness author, James Talmadge Stevens. On this show, you'll learn more in an hour than some people learn in a year. As the economic and political climate in the United States continues to deteriorate, now more than ever, it pays to be prepared. Get a friend, grab a chair, sit back, and please give a warm welcome to your host, Dr. Prepper.
Hello, I'm Dr. Prepper. I am here today with the Dr. Prepper CPR Talk Show, where we discuss critical preparedness resources, those resources that will help you become prepared or get better prepared. Because after all, in today's world, if you are truly prepared, you have no need to fear. My guest today is Rick Austin. He's called the Survivalist Gardener, and his book is Secret Garden of Survival. And we're going to talk to him about home farming and tell you how on a half acre he's become pretty much self-sustaining and grows enough food to feed his family. So, Rick, come on in, let's talk.
Hey, good to be here.
Glad to have you, thanks. Now, you said that set it up in the people's mind that if they can imagine a food garden that they only have to plant once a year and takes up very little space, provides food for them and their family, costs very little, and it'll do that for 30 years or so, why wouldn't anyone want to get to know you better?
Well, I don't know the answer to that question.
I should have made it positive. Everybody would. Yeah. If you could do this, everybody would want to know you, wouldn't they?
Well, yeah, and every time I've given a presentation or done a radio show or that sort of stuff, I mean, people are just kind of like, oh, yeah, well, tell me about it. How does that work? So,
well, we didn't tell them you wouldn't have to weed it, and you don't have to buy fertilizer, and you don't even have to use pesticides. You're making this too easy. That's as easy as sprouting in a jar.
Well, it is easy because it's basically the way nature does things.
All right.
And, I've been an advocate that if you let nature do what nature wants to do, it'll magically do what it needs to do, and if you don't stand in its way and try and make it do what you want it to do, it works. And it's been doing that for millions of years. So.
What a novel idea. In other words, let nature take its course, because it's been balancing resources for how many years? Since the day one, huh?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
All right, so level with us. How big is your property that you can do all these things? Acres?
We basically built our latest homestead, solar sustainable home on the top of a hill, nice looking view, looking out at the mountains, and we have a half acre cut out of an old oak mature forest. So basically half an acre is cut out of that. So we've got this little garden plot stuck right in the middle of all of that, and it goes downhill. It's on a south-facing slope, and I think we might have seven terraces. But I've got maybe 30 different types of fruit trees. Just about everything that will grow here in this area. We're in western North Carolina, and just about every berry bush that will grow, and it's all done in really kind of a permaculture format. So instead of planting in rows like your traditional garden, you sort of plant in concentric circles. So you've got a central tree for each guild. So that would be your fruit tree like an apple tree or a peach tree or a pear tree or whatever it happens to be. And then around that, outside the drip line of that tree, you've got your berry bushes, all edible stuff, so your blueberries and blackberries and elderberries, that kind of thing. And outside of that, so that everything gets sun, you've got your herb layer, so you've got your medicinal herbs and your cooking herbs. And then outside of that, you've got your ground covers, So everything from clovers to buckwheat to anything that really is kind of a ground cover that's flowering, and that all attracts good bugs, which kill the bad bugs you don't want to have. And running up the tree, you've got a vine layer, because in nature vines grow on trees. There are no trellises in nature, and we've got grapes growing on our apple trees. We just so happen to have also planted grapes on some trellises too, kind of as an experiment, looking at the normal sort of traditional way to plant grapes. And I will tell you that unequivocally, our grapes that grow on apple trees produce 7 times more fruit than the grapes that grow on trellises.
Unbelievable. Great. Now, tomatoes require a lot of sunshine. Does the tree inhibit that, or do you just plant them on the south side of the tree so the sun stays on them most of the day?
Well, the permaculture concept is really, it's called permaculture because it's permanent agriculture. So most of the plants that we have, you plant once and never have to plant again. Those are your perennials, and that's the basis of your food forest. Now, we also grow your annuals like your tomatoes and cucumbers and all that other sort of stuff, and we plant those in amongst those guilds. But they're planted in such a way that they get plenty of sun, and we do a lot of companion planting. So, for example, if you plant tomatoes next to catnip, green tomato hornworms won't go near it.
Right.
And we had a really successful year this last year because we were still harvesting tomatoes in November at Thanksgiving, and we get pretty cold around here.
Yes,
so
you do, yeah.
So it does work. It's amazing.
Well, I'm assuming that there's not a lot of information generally because we become so regimented as to buy a packet of seeds, plant them in a row, stake them up, whatever. By somebody's plan. You're a little bit innovative, aren't you?
Well, this, in one way, yes, another way, no, because, like I said, nature's been doing it this way for millions of years, and this is really just kind of, permaculture gone wild, really, we're just doing things that I've read maybe 30 books on permaculture and, on all the different aspects that we incorporated into our, homestead landscape here. And most of it's pretty highbrow, pretty research-oriented, difficult for a common person to understand, and, it's hundreds and hundreds of pages of text just trying to get to the meat of it. And, when we put this thing together, I took pictures from start to finish, and and say sort of archived all these photos, and really kind of went from one step to another. And the book that I wrote, Secret Garden of Survival: How to Grow a Camouflage Food Forest, is really a step-by-step, almost cookbook approach to doing this for yourself. So someone can look at my book, which is really just kind of simplified, and there's a lot of photos in it, even though my publisher kind of suggested that, that's going to be awfully expensive, especially if they're all color. And I said, well, they're not going to be able to see the detail without that. So, we bit the bullet and really did the right thing, I think, and we got a lot of photos in the thing, and really just kind of a step-by-step approach so that people can see, how to even start the thing from, how do you take barren ground and make it into something, to, how to dig a hole, the proper hole for a fruit tree.
Right. So you probably don't recommend a typical round hole for round root bed, right?
Well, we oftentimes plant more than one plant together, and so, for example, if you plant comfrey next to one of your fruit trees, comfrey has a 30-foot taproot, so it'll go down and it'll reach minerals and nutrients that the tree roots can't reach, and it'll bring them up to the surface. So, we'll plant comfrey in the same hole with an apple tree, and and a muscadine grape in the same hole, and maybe a nitrogen fixer like a Siberian tea shrub or something, and plant all of that really in the same hole. And they all work together. The roots intermingle. They all share nutrients, and like I said, it works.
So you've taken that red clay of North Carolina, as I remembered, and turned it in, by planting your trees, you can call it a food forest.
Yes, absolutely. We had North Carolina red clay, and if you're familiar with that, if that stuff gets in the sun for too long, it turns into a brick.
That's right.
Really nothing grows in it. So, we did a number of things, and my book talks about that, the steps involved, but we use a lot of good decomposed mulch, to help bring back the soil and bring back not only nutrients, but also the microorganisms. When we laid out these terraces, we did it because the best place to store water is actually underground. And if you are on a hillside and you have terraces in it, you actually end up having more physical area to plant in, as well as a way to capture water, because the water runs downhill on one terrace and ends up in the bottom, and then just kind of seeps in, and then your plants that are planted along that berm there get a chance to take in that water. So, it makes it nice because once the plants are established, you really don't have to water at all. And we've had times when we've had 6 weeks of drought, straight, and our plants have been green and growing and no problem. And our neighbors, just down the way, everything's turning brown and dying.
Okay. Now, what you've done is created. The title of your book suggests that if you plant properly, even in an urban setting, you can pretty well hide the fact that you're growing food. That's what the book is about.
Yeah, absolutely. It looks natural because, in fact, that's the way nature grows. And so you've got a lot of stuff growing together. You've got a lot of plants that sort of intermingle. You've got vines running up inside your trees. You've got a lot of weeds, in fact, that are, in open areas that are actually helping to bring the soil back. And if someone was to walk by it, it just kind of looks like overgrown underbrush. And
gotcha.
if we were to be in a situation where there's been a long-term disaster and people are hungry and they're looking for food, the first place they're going to attack is going to be somebody's garden that's a row garden that looks like there's food growing there. And even if there's no food growing there at that time, if they see a grow garden, they're going to assume that household has stored food. So, if you look at my secret garden of survival, somebody walking by is going to go, well, those people must have abandoned that property a long time ago. No sense looking at it. So.
Yeah, they see some trees, and they may have fruit on them, but only for a short period. It's either too green to eat or not yet mature, and obviously, when they become mature, you're going after them, so you're exposed only for a short period of time. Plant it in your backyard, and it doesn't even look evident that it's a fruit tree.
Correct, yeah. I show some pictures and some slides. I got some in my book as well, and, when you see everything from a distance, it just looks like a massive green, a bunch of different things growing, and you really don't know what it is.
Right.
When you look at it really up close, you can see that in the same 2-foot square space, I've got peanuts growing, I've got cucumbers growing, I've got watermelon, I've got mint and comfrey and a whole bunch of other stuff, and a lot of it, most of it actually is edible. And it's just amazing because it's all basically camouflage, and all of those things are growing together, which sort of strikes in the face of conventional wisdom, where everything has to have rows and everything has to have space between, and as long as nothing's shading each other out, they all work together, and some plants prefer to have a little more mottled shade than others, and perfect case in point is the grapes. They do better on an apple tree than they do on a trellis.
And they don't suck they don't suck from the tree. They just cling to it, to the bark, and the exterior bark is not a carrier. It is just a protection. So more vines is more protection.
Yeah, basically. And they just kind of grow underneath the leaves of the apple tree, and underneath that you've got your grapes growing under the leaves of the grape.
You could really weird out some people when they see grapes hanging from a tree.
Yeah, I've seen some photographs. People are like, wow.
I got a grape tree. It's got to be a mind blower. We need to take just a couple of minutes out for our advertisers, if you don't want to get a sip of water. I am Dr. Prepper. This is the Dr. Prepper CPR Talk Show. Critical preparedness resources for preppers so they can become prepared or even get better prepared. And this afternoon, my guest is Rick Austin, the survivalist gardener, and he's the author of Secret Garden of Survival. You can go to his website, secretgardenofsurvival.com. You can buy the book there. He's discounted it so that he can get the book into your hot little hands, or you can find it at Amazon, and it's also in a Kindle format, so you have your choice. We'll be back in just a moment and continue our conversation with Rick Austin. I'm Dr. Prepper. This is the Preparedness Radio Network. Back, I'm Dr. Prepper, and this is the Dr. Prepper CPR show for today, our Critical Preparedness Resources, our talk show. Today we're speaking with Rick Austin, the survivalist gardener. He's out of the west of, I'll get it right, in Asheville. I was going to say Mount Airy, but you're further west than Mount Airy, and certainly you're there from one of the hills out there in the Appalachians. It's good to have you on today. Thanks, Rick, for being here.
Well, it's great to be here. I appreciate you giving me the opportunity.
It's great. We were talking about the fact that the garden you designed and that you have shown people how to perpetuate really doesn't look like a garden because you haven't put it all up there in military format. It's not standing, it's not all in a row. You gathered in did you call them hills or gills? Which was it?
Gills.
Yeah, okay, great. Yeah, like a GUILD, a guild like they used to have in Belgium. Yeah, okay, Europe. So a guild is a cooperative bunch of people who have similar skills and have joined for professionalism, so that was a good name. What we've done then, basically, what you've done is urge people to put plants together in companion planting, and there are many plants that work together, and there are books about that, I'm sure. And you can look that up even on the Internet. I know you can do that. But you're able to use the best of nature to help nature perform at her best, to produce larger, larger fruit and veggies as well, because you're giving them a healthy home. But also you're getting better results in terms of size, taste, and you say everything except a few of the seeds are self-perpetuating. They're permanent growing products like grapes and other things that have roots in the ground all the time, and each year they come back and grow. You found that this really helps people not feel so regimented, and does it take some of the stress out of being a practicing permaculture?
Well, it certainly takes the stress out of gardening because, I've been doing this for 30-something years, and I used to be a traditional apple farmer, and I learned a lot of things the hard way. I had rows and rows of apple trees, so I basically had a single crop planted in one area, and I had grass planted in between, and little did I know that the grass sucked up the same nutrients the apple trees needed.
Okay.
And, just like every other apple farmer out there, I spent a fortune in pesticide and fertilizer. I had to use pesticide every 10 days and after every rain, and I still had scabby, wormy apples just like every other apple farmer. And, I knew there had to be a better way. So, I did a lot of research, did a lot of trial and error. And I guess, as they say, when you make enough mistakes, you become an expert. And, that's kind of
so true.
Where I am today. So, I speak to a lot of people about what it is we're doing. I speak to professional agricultural people, cooperative extensions, so people in the ag business that go, oh yeah, well, maybe we're doing things the wrong way. And and I speak to a lot of people who are homesteaders or people who are in the prepper movement, who want to be able to take care of themselves and want to be able to provide food. And the neat thing about this is, for 30 years I hated gardening. I hated it. It was nice to get the food and it was nice to grow the stuff, but I hated tilling soil. I hated pulling weeds. I hated having to fight off the bugs constantly. And when I found out about this permaculture stuff, I hit myself on the head and go, oh yeah, nature's been doing it this way for millions of years without pesticides, without fertilizer, and it seems like it's going to work. So it's what's amazing is once you get the plants in place, and that's where all the work is, just getting everything set up, and you can do it one guild at a time, so you don't have to do an entire half acre or an entire quarter acre or whatever space you have. And once you get everything planted and established, it just takes off and takes care of itself. So all you do is harvest. And, that's the fun part is, picking the strawberries, the blueberries, the blackberries, the grapes, the peaches, and it works so well that, we have more food in that half acre than we can possibly consume. Here's a little story. Every day this last summer I would go out and I would, pick whatever was growing in season at the time. So strawberries came first, then blueberries and blackberries, and peaches and pears were later on, and figs and that sort of stuff. And I was one day I was picking grapes, and I would literally come in with 1 to 2 3-gallon buckets, so 3 to 6 gallons of grapes every single day after being out in the garden for an hour. And my wife was canning furiously trying to keep up, and one day I walk up the steps with another 2 buckets, another 6 gallons, and she says to me, "Stop! I can't keep up." So, we just ended up freezing a lot of the stuff so that when the season was over, we could can a lot of things. But it's just, that's the beauty of it. That's the fulfilling thing, is being able to pick all this great fruit and then make something out of it and preserve it, store it, and turn it into, everything from grape jelly to vinegar that you can preserve and cook with. So.
Rick, do you find that fruits are easier to deal with in this kind of agricultural setting than veggies?
Well, your typical vegetables, that you buy in the grocery store are basically annuals. And your fruits, like your fruit trees, your nut trees, your berries, they're typically perennial. So you plant them once and they grow in the same place for, a lifetime, basically. So those perennials have the opportunity to establish longer and deeper root systems. Mm-hmm. They're much hardier than your annuals. And if you understand what an annual has to do, it basically has to go through its entire life cycle in 3 months. Uh-huh. It goes from a seed to a seedling to having flowers to bearing fruit, and then, to producing that fruit and dying off. And that fruit ends up having seeds in it, so that could be, watermelon or cantaloupe or, anything like that, and, squash or whatever. And it's got to do all of that in 3 months. So it really doesn't have time to put down deep roots. It doesn't have time to get hardy and, be able to fight off disease and pests and that sort of thing. But, the beauty of interplanting your annuals with your perennials is that they're disguised too, not only from, 4-legged and potentially 2-legged pests, but also from your insects. I mean, here's another story. When we planted all of this stuff, the first season, I just got lazy and I was running out of time, and I ended up planting my potatoes in rows because I had a lot of potatoes I wanted to plant. So I just planted them in rows. And they were doing really well. You know, they looked great. They had nice green leafy plants. And one morning I went out into the garden and I went to the end of one of the rows, and the entire plant, all the leaves were gone. And I said, oh, man, I hope we don't have deer in here eating this stuff. And you know, I moved to the second plant, and that was completely decimated. The third plant was completely decimated. When I got to the fourth one, it was completely covered with Colorado potato bugs. And what it was, by planting in rows, it was like a smorgasbord, so that those bugs just went from one plant to the next, to the next, to the next, and they were completely decimating the entire crop. So if you interplant and almost camouflage your annuals along with your perennials, the bugs don't have that kind of thing where they can go from one plant to another. They're going to travel some distance. And also the beauty of planting in these guilds is you have a lot of insect-attracting plants like your mountain mints and your herbs that attract predatory wasps that kill the bad bugs you don't want to have in your garden. So, you know, this whole thing works together so that you've got, you know, your pesticide is essentially your predatory wasps that kill those bad bugs. And it also gives them the opportunity for interplanting among these guilds. So say you put your potatoes in a bunch of different areas, you know, these Colorado potato beetles have to move and travel, and most likely they're going to get picked off before they can get to your next plant.
I was just thinking about the fact that you call your book The Secret Garden of Survival. Where did that concept, where did the idea for the book come from, other than the fact that it's pretty much camouflage because you don't plant in orderly rows. You've got them planted around trees. The seasonal plants are put in, I guess you'd call them propitious locations. They're put where they'll do best. They may be identified, but generally speaking, what's the importance of having a survival garden?
Well, you know, I've been a prepper myself, a so-called prepper revivalist for years. You know, long before they coined the terms.
Yeah.
You know, I grew up in New Hampshire, and you know, I lived through hard winters where, you know, an ice storm or a blizzard would knock out power for a week at a time. So you had to learn how to cook with wood, you know, how to heat your house with wood, how to store your food outside in the snow. Mm-hmm. You know, and I also went to the other extreme, and I lived in Florida for a number of years, and in the hurricane and lightning capital of the world. So, you know, we often went without power, and that in that case, we're 90 degrees and 90% humidity. So I understand this stuff, and I've always been, you know, prepared. I didn't know what a prepper was until somebody coined the term recently.
Yeah, right.
But you know, so that's all near and dear to my heart as well. And you know, I realize that this whole prepping thing is becoming mainstream, and there's a lot of people out there that are looking for ways to be able to feed themselves, and that's kind of important. You know, I've long been saying to people that you can't buy your way out of a disaster situation. Mm-hmm. So, you know, if you can store a certain amount of food for a certain amount of time, but, you know, let's say you survive the end of the world as we know it, and let's say you survive for a year. But, you know, let's say you get that much food. You know, how are you going to feed yourself and your livestock when those food stores run out? You know,
that's right.
How are you going to replenish that year's worth of food storage, and then how do you keep others from stealing it? So that's really what this is about. You know, you're setting up this permanent garden that's going to provide you and your animals. You know, if you've got small animals, and I advocate that. You know, things like goats to give you milk and cheese, and ducks for eggs and that kind of thing for protein. Mm-hmm. You know, they all need to eat too. And on our farm, you know, we have kind of a rule that all of our animals need to live off the land as well. So, you know, there aren't going to be feed stores open when we have an end of the world as we know it situation. And you're not going to be able to get fertilizer and pesticide and, you know, use mechanized, petrochemical run equipment. So, you've got to have something in place that's going to be able to feed you and your family and your livestock, regardless of what happens. And even if nothing ever did happen, the great thing is, my wife and I almost never go to the grocery store anymore. So, with prices rising the way they are, and with milk approaching $4 and $5 a gallon, it's something that you need to think about.
Mm-hmm. So, you're kind of telling us what it's been, what it is, and what it will become. What is your garden concept under the permaculture, which really means permanent agriculture, plant once, forget it, so to speak? And because they are perennials, they're going to come back every year, pretty much on schedule. As soon as the soil is warm enough and et cetera, it works. It's automatic. What are some of the other things that planting once and harvesting for a lifetime is really a great idea? Typically, most people don't do that. They go out and buy a seed, a plant, and then next year they have to plant another seed. And with genetic modified seed, they don't. You can't harvest the seed, dry them, and use them next season because you may not get anything near like. Obviously, if you plant a bean, you won't get a tomato, but you'll get a different strain of bean that you may not like, may not want, or may not taste good. So, what's the secret? What is your secret? The secret garden of survival is more than just where it is. It's the secret that's always been known. It's the hidden secret, right?
Well, yeah.
It's the open. Yeah. It's the hidden knowledge of an open secret, I guess is what I meant to say.
Yeah. Well, when you mentioned GMO, that's really an important factor because a lot of people think they can save seeds that they're using now, and a lot of them you can't because you're not going to get the same thing. And
right.
When you mentioned if you plant a bean, you're not going to get a tomato. Well, you might get a fish. Because they're genetically modifying. They're taking genes from things that aren't even plants and putting them in these things. And so, when you're messing with nature that way, you got to wonder. You got to really wonder. And I recently have had a sort of ongoing conversation with some folks on LinkedIn in a horticulture group about what's going on with Monsanto and Dow Chemical and the fact that they are putting this insecticide on the seeds of corn. And, originally they did it to take care of worms that were in the soil that were eating the roots of the corn. Mm-hmm. And, Dow, no, it wasn't Dow, it was actually Bayer Pharmaceutical had done a study, and they knew that this stuff was toxic to bees. But they said, it's going to be in the soil. You don't have to worry about it. But what they didn't understand then is it's actually systemic. So that means that pesticide is in the roots, but it also goes up the stalk. It also goes into the food that we eat, and it also goes into the pollen, which in corn's particular situation is basically air distributed. So it goes everywhere. And I lost 4 hives of bees this year that were very healthy bees, and I lost them over the winter, and the hives were full of honey, so it's not like they didn't have something to eat. And somebody told me, and did a little research on it, that they will pick up some of this pollen from the corn, and because it's quote unquote low grade pollen, they don't eat it until they run out of everything else, and that's what kills them. When they eat that pollen. So, in fact, I think there was a study done in Germany that when they use this stuff on seeds and corn, which is now illegal in Europe, it killed 300,000 bees, and 29 out of 30 dead bees were killed by this pesticide. So I'm not sure if I answered your question or not. Well,
understand, if it had an easy answer, I would have done it all by myself. So obviously, it's simple, But anything simple still has steps that you have to take. There's a procedure you have to follow. And really the key is, you said, let nature do it its way. They're the things you plant together. My mother was good at that. She had a real skill. She knew where to plant the peppers. The hot peppers and the green bell peppers were not planted together because they didn't need each other, but she'd put them with other plants. And I don't know that secret. I live on a very, very rocky hill. The subsoil is rock. I mean, it is rock. It's a soft rock, but it's rock, and there's no dirt in it. So we have to put beds. We have to build beds. The natural soil is what we call gumbo. It's very much like clay, except it's goopy. It's black, and it's really goopy when it's wet, and when it's dry, it's adobe. It's just black adobe, and you get fissures in the ground and cracks in the ground if you don't keep it wet, which leads to a lot of damage to walls and floors and doors, ways, and windows in homes. So it's a real problem here because we are also been in a drought situation for the last 10 years, an occasional relief of some rain, but the advice here is don't water your lawn, water your foundation so that it stays stable or stays wet without drying up. Now, the symbiotic relationships of planting things together, companion planting, is a serious subject. Do you cover that pretty well in your book, or would that be something else that need to get?
Yeah, no, we cover it in the book and really sort of talk about that and a number of things. You know, and you know, I mean, there are other books out there. If you've ever read the book Carrots Love Tomatoes, it's kind of like that, but you know, much bigger and much broader scale. And you know, really talk about all the elements of the guild and all the different plants and how different trees have different plants in their guild. So, for example, if you take a black walnut tree, and if you know people who are familiar with black walnut tree and you ask them what grows underneath a black walnut tree, most people will tell you nothing grows underneath a black walnut tree. And that's because black walnut trees actually give off a toxin in their roots because they don't like competition. But if you plant things like the nightshades, like peppers, tomatoes, and currants underneath a black walnut tree, those things love that, and they do really well together. So
your book is a complete one for this, you know, for a small homestead, farmstead, if you will, or even for a larger one. It's just a little radical for the typical corporate farmer who has to get his equipment engaged in order to do things and use pesticides and all that other kind of stuff, because that's how you do it on the corporate level. You have to have mechanization.
Mechanized farming, because you know, the reason they put them in rows is because it's easier for the machines to go through there, and it's easier to spray.
Yeah.
But you know, they're basically creating a situation where there is less and less topsoil every single year, and less nutrition in the food that we are eating. I had a nutritionist tell me that you know, that if you take the food and vegetables that we ate in 1960s, they have 1/3. Our food today has 1/3 the nutrients that those food had. Now that's 1/3, which means we would have to eat 3 times as much of the same food to get the same amount of nutrient. And that's because we're robbing our soil. You know, we're using the mechanized farming, and it's not the way nature has done things and is doing things, and it doesn't give that ground a chance to get reestablished. And you know, we plant plants in our guilds that actually add nitrogen back to the soil. There are a lot of nitrogen fixers that help the other plants, and there are plants that, you know, turn into mulch that help you know, keep the moisture in the soil and also help add nutrients back to the soil. Yeah. And that's the way nature does it.
So by your guild planning, where you do concentric circles and have a tree as the center, which gives stability to the soil because of the root system, what you're doing is encouraging the symbiotic relationship as nature's done. A jungle is a good example of that. we don't get to jungle very often, but every time you see a movie, you notice there are all kinds of plants. There's not just one kind of plant there. There are all kinds of trees and things crawling up trees and etc. So what you've done is kind of replicate that, and so you don't have to plant alternate crops and things like that to enrich the soil. They're doing it kind of automatically.
Yeah, correct. And you're right. That's a perfect example of a jungle. Stuff growing up, and I think more people who saw my food forest would say, "Oh, it looks like a jungle."
Yeah.
Well, that's not an orchard. That's not a vineyard. That's not a berry farm. That's a jungle. And the hardest person I had to overcome this and keep out of the garden was my wife, who was a city girl, who really liked things in straight rows and always wanted to pick weeds. And I had to slap her on the hand and say, "Honey, weeds are just misunderstood plants. You gotta understand that weeds will grow where nothing else will grow, and they are pioneer plants.
Right.
The reason that they grow is because nothing else will grow there, and nature hates a vacuum.
It does.
So weeds go in there, and they will break up the soil. They'll allow air to get in there, aerate the soil, and they'll allow water to get in the soil, which you couldn't before. Especially if you're dealing with North Carolina red clay. And then they become almost succession plants. They'll die back, they'll add nutrients to the soil, and then you can plant other things on top of that. And when you pull out those weeds, you basically stop that cycle of nature right in its tracks, and you will always have problems with stuff growing in that area.
So by using what you call berms, which are mounds of dirt in long rows or around to prevent movement of the land and water outside the area you want it, but you said you terraced, and then some berms. And if you have a berm, you have to have a swell, right?
Well, yeah.
They kind of come together. It's the yin and the yang of the landscape. But what that does is it allows water to stop and pond for a while. It then sinks into the ground, and so it can work its way backward underneath the ground into the local aquifer, which is it may not be like we have. We live over an aquifer here in San Antonio. We have no natural water above ground except an occasional river when it rains really hard. The lakes are few and far between. We have to make them work in order to have ponds for our coal-fired plants and things like that. But generally speaking, all our water is underground around here, and the city sits on this huge bubble of rock over a swell. We just have this imagination that they drop the first bomb on one of our military installations, the whole city sinks down into it's gone. It's like the largest sinkhole on the face of the earth, and it's a rock shelf. Yeah. So that's why I don't live in town. I live way out of town. But I live on the aquifer also. I only had to go 90 feet down to get all the water I can drink and run. I've never ever had any water, except it's very superic, a lot of copper in it, and a lot of iron too. Unfortunately, it has a copper taste, but it has a lot of iron in it. It's really fun stuff. And so we have to filter for that, or just learn to drink it, and then we have to learn to clean it out of all the water basins, whatever kind they are. But you indicated that the benefits of planting like this is that you can have, in combination, because of their symbiotic relationship, because of their companionship, that you can have nuts and berries, and as we said, you can have grapes growing out of a nut tree, and it's as much as you possibly could consume. The more land you have, the more concentric circles you plant, right?
Correct. Yeah. So if people have asked me, well, can I do this in my backyard in an urban environment? And the answer is yes, you certainly can. And I've even had people who have seen my presentations go, wow, this overcomes my issues with the homeowners association who say I can't have a garden in my backyard. Well, now I can plant an apple tree, and oh, by the way, it just happens to have some fruit on it, and I can plant grapes on that, and I can plant herbs around that. It's like, wow, this is the solution to my problem. So,
right.
You can plant it in a small little area, or you can plant it, in a large area.
I'm assuming that when you're meeting with architects and homeowners associations, one of the things you address is how stupid can you be to prevent people from growing their own gardens? I mean, talk about idiocy.
Well, it is really idiotic. But these people move into nice gated neighborhoods, and somebody decided that they don't want to see row gardens. Well, I can understand that. They don't want to look like a farm, I guess. But people need to eat, and that more and more people who are coming to the realization that things may not be as good as they'd like them to be in the long term, are starting to think about, well, how am I going to take care of my family if something does happen? And this Hurricane Sandy thing, I think, was an eye opener for a lot of people that thought it can never happen here.
Never happened here, yeah.
Never happened here. What do we have to worry about hurricanes for? And I was on one of Survivor Jane's tweets a while back when this all happened, and there were people they were interviewing like, when's the government going to come and save me? And they didn't have food, and I don't have anything to eat. And she made some comment on her tweet like, well, what is it about prepare for the storm of the century that you didn't understand?
Yeah. Yeah. It was a 100-year. It was a 100-year storm. They just didn't say when the last one was. Well, but one of the neat things is you said you were from New Hampshire, so you grew up more or less knowing that occasionally the lights were going to go out and not come on until, for a week or so. And you knew that if you didn't have chopped wood outside, even though it had snow on it, you might freeze to death when the lights were out. Or sometimes you just have to use the alternate stove, the Ben Franklin stove, to cook your food on because the electric range wasn't working, or the gas supply got cut off because something, an accident somewhere. All those things do occur in the lives of people. We're just beginning to see it now more with more evidence. It just happens more often. And as our infrastructure gets older, we're going to have more and more of this.
Yeah, and that's right. I don't think people realize that. But yes, I grew up to be as a quote unquote hardy New Englander, and you've got kind of got that Puritan work ethic that when the Pilgrims came over, and we all have to be able to take care of ourselves, and I kind of grew up with that. But I think today, even in my own children, you see this sort of entitlement generation that, basically can go out and buy anything they want to buy, and, they're just kind of a consumer mentality about everything, and we're losing a lot of skills to be able to take care of ourselves. And I think, I was talking to someone before, and I said, if we had a grid down situation and we just, society basically gets shut down for a month, I think, close to 80% of the people would die, and they could have food growing right under their nose. They just don't even know what it looks like when it's not on the shelf.
Oh, yeah. I have people pick up cabbage saying, this doesn't look like lettuce. Of course not. It's cabbage. I mean, seriously, in the grocery store, you have people who are so busy texting, they haven't figured out. I mean, they hardly know where the floor is. They stumble over everything. Maybe they can tell the difference between a French loaf of bread and a regular loaf of bread, but I doubt that even some days. Everything is fast food. Everything is done for them. It's delivered, to a high-tech store where it's put out on a rack, and it usually pre-weighed and pre-conditioned, and what you see is what you get, and it's expensive. Buy grapes if they were more than 99 cents. I'm to the point now, if they go over $2.78, I don't buy them. I mean, I've had a standard, and that's in 2 years. So obviously, grapes would be a good thing. And see, that's what I've got to apply here. So I'm going to get your book. I'm going to find out how to store my water in the ground, because here on a hill, I've got to learn how to terrace and do things, but also got to learn how to get rid of there are no rules against growing as long as I cut my weeds. Well, if I can prove to them it's not a weed, I don't have to cut it. And I've got a big front yard. Actually, I live way up on a hill in a very, very small town. The fire department's between me and the police department. The police department's on the square in the little city hall. So I'm downtown. Or is it uptown? Can't remember. Anyway, I'm downtown. I'm in the middle of town on the city square, except you can't see my home. And this little town of 400 plus people and about 140 plus homes. And it is really an interesting place to be in. We picked it because it's isolated. It's the kind of place, there's so much between us, so many people live between us and downtown. By the time people started, the real downtown of San Antonio City, by the time the zombies, if you want to call it, the people who are hungry find us, I mean, my goodness, they will have destroyed about a third of the town before they get here. And getting to us, you'd not want to jump over all that because it's a whole lot more wealth between us and the city than there is from after us. In fact, we live on the county line, and it's woods and acres and ranches that go for 30 miles. So we picked the best place we could, knowing what we knew, we made the best decision we could. Unfortunately, it didn't include gardening, but I do have a greenhouse. I just need to get it up and running. We have wild deer. We have 40, 50 wild deer. They are wild. They come through here. Can't shoot them until things get really bad. But my garden served as a draw for every four-legged animals. So my fig trees and things like that are invitations to come on down, boys. We're hungry because they're used to coming in and eating these things. We never get ripe fruit here. Not bugs, but birds and or large birds I'm talking about here, or animals eat them out of the trees. So we know that they're used to coming here and eating. So we know that we built ourselves kind of a feeding trough for a little meat here and there, even though I don't like deer meat, by the way. It's just not like how. So what we've got here is that by doing all this stuff, we can bring into our own ability the opportunity to have growies in our yard that will give us nutrition, they'll give us food, that'll help us weather as we call it, Tiatuaki. By the way, I don't see Tiatuaki as everybody else does. I recognize that, when you move from New Hampshire to to wherever you move, I think Florida, wasn't it? Did you tell me once? That was the end of the world as you knew it, wasn't it? I mean, you didn't have to put up with winters anymore. Except now when it gets cold, it probably bothers you more. But you see, you got married. That was the end of that world as you knew it. You had children. That was the end of the world. Education, writing your book. All that has changed your world as you know it. It's happening all the time. We think of it as negative. Actually, I think there's more Tiatuaki that is positive for us because it happens all the time. A better job, a new job, a college degree, new children, another child, whatever, a new car. All those things are positive Tiatuakis. If you can afford them, of course. But if you can't, it's really a Tiatuaki. Then it's negative. Well, listen, we've had a lot of fun today. We've been talking about how your system can provide the fruit and veggies, nuts and berries. And the thing is, they just keep on growing. Then you can plant your seasonal crops in much better on much better ground because all this growing is creating a better soil and agricultural environment, what you call permaculture. Rick, we're at the part of the show where I ask the guest to kind of look back over his notes, mental or otherwise, and think of things that we might have wanted to say and didn't get said. I'm going to give you what I call the elevator moment. We're on the elevator, and we're all going to the top. Nobody talks to anybody on an elevator. So you turn around and say, friends, here's what I'd like for you to remember from our conversation. Can you take a minute or so and do that?
Well, sure. The reason I wrote the book was because many people asked me, would I write a book? Because they loved what we were doing, wanted to know how to do it themselves. And so, I wrote the book, and I tried to make it easy to follow and easy to read. I tried to make it short and sweet so people can get right down to the meat of the subject. And I used, like I said, a lot of color pictures and illustrations. Even though the publisher said it was going to be expensive, I knew it would be better for my readers and, to actually say how it's done. So, and if they say a picture is worth 1,000 words, and since I have over 120 color pictures, I guess I saved my readers from reading over 120,000.
You saved $120,000. I love it.
So, the beauty is, they can do it themselves. They can have this Garden of Eden on their own property. It really isn't difficult to do. It really is easy to maintain. You just have to do it right, and you just have to do it the way nature does it. And if you follow the book, so to speak, it'll work, and you'll have more food than you can consume, which is important for you and your family, no matter what kind of situation we're in.
All right. Well, thank you for that. I appreciate you being on today, Rick. You can find, you said your book is available at your website, which is secretgardenofsurvival.com. That's secretgardenofsurvival.com. And you're offering a discount for those who will buy from you. Just be friendly, and we appreciate that. Or they can go to Amazon, and you have a Kindle version, so they can download that instantly. And perhaps in the future you'll have a version for a digital version that you can have for those of us who just have a computer and not a Kindle. Appreciate having you on. I hope that people will listen to what you said, learn from your experience, and take advantage of the opportunity to have their own secret garden of survival. Rick, appreciate your being the survivalist gardener and for coming on the show. I hope it all goes well. Feel free to come back and let's do this again. Love to have you as hosting a show where you can teach people this. Again, your email address is survivorgarden@att.net. That's survivorgarden@att.net. And again, secretgardenofsurvival.com for your website. You're on Facebook and Twitter. Go there, like him, talk to him. Have a great time. Rick, thanks again for being on today. We appreciate it very much.
Well, I thank you so much for having me.
You bet. I'm Dr. Prepper. This has been the Dr. Prepper Show, and our CPR talk show, Critical Preparedness Resources.